everybody, it's Mrs. Mancuso doing a little AP Bio review with you. And so one of the questions asked was, tell me about the immune system. So your immune system is all about keeping pathogens out. Pathogens would love to live in us because we're warm and we have so many nutrients and it's just ideal. So our immune system has 3 lines of defense. So the first line is to be a barrier. Do whatever we can to keep pathogens out of our body. So this barrier, great example is our skin. So our skin doesn't allow things in through it. We also have waxes, we have tears, we have acids, both in our skin and in our stomach and in our sweat. We have all these different things to keep organisms out. So this is very non-specific, the first line. Doesn't matter what's trying to get in, we're gonna work on keeping it out. All right, your second line. Your second line, the pathogen has now entered. It is now in your body, but the response is still non-specific. So what can we do to try and get rid of something that has gotten into our body? First of all, you should think of macrophages. So macrophages are those big white blood cells that will surround and engulf a pathogen and take it in. And so when it surrounds it and engulfs it, it will actually display markers showing other cells in the body what it destroyed. You also have things like your inflammatory response. So inflammation is what happens when you have a cut or a sore in an area and it becomes very red and inflamed. It causes vasodilation. Vasodilation is when you increase blood flow to an area because you're trying to increase the amount of white blood cells that are going to get there and take it over. It also often leads to fevers, and fevers are caused by molecules called pyrogens, which increase the body temperature, trying to make it inhospitable for things. We also have what's called a complement. These are proteins that our body makes to try and get rid of whatever's in it. We also make interferons. Interferons are made specifically in response to a virus. So if an infected cell has been infected with a virus, it will release interferons, and those warn neighboring cells that the virus is present, and it causes all of those neighboring cells to increase their selectivity. So do not be permeable, do not let things in. Another second line are your natural killer cells. Those attack cells in your body that are cancerous. So they recognize something that is different about their cells. Actually, let's talk about what's different between cells. So here is one of my body cells, and my body cells have Nancy Mancuso markers on it. So this isn't a receptor. I'm going to make it look funkier. I'm going to make it look really funky. This is my MHC, major histocompatibility complex. This is unique to me. These are my markers so that my cells know that this is a self cell. If something else was in my body, it would have a different marker. That might be its markers. That's non-self. Your immune system attacks non-self cells because they don't belong. Well, a natural killer cell notices cells that the MHCs seem to appear self, but maybe they're not made quite right. So let's say it's like this. It looks very close to it, but maybe it was made too quickly. Maybe it's a tumor. So natural killer cells attack your own tumors and reduce your own chance of cancer. All right, then we have our third line. Your third line is specific. That means it will fight actual pathogens based on what they are. This is what you call your immune response. So your immune response first starts off with a helper T cell. Helper T cell is very specific in that it docks with a macrophage. So here's a macrophage, and it's displaying the antigen markers. And this helper T cell is going to notice what this is, and it sends out interleukins. They're also called cytokines. All right, these are chemicals, and those chemicals cause B cells to increase and T cells to increase. So if the data is showing that you're having an increase in B cells and an increase in T cells, you are now in the third line and you are reacting to something in your body. The T cells have caused the proliferation of both of these cells. The B line response is called the humoral response. The humoral response is all about B cells making antibodies. Antibodies are called immunoglobulins. And we have 5 different classes of immunoglobulins. These molecules look like Y-shaped proteins. And the different classes are just based on their different shapes. So this shape would have to bind to that pathogen that's there. And when it binds to it, it disables it. When your body makes the right antibody, it will go ahead and make a memory B cell. That stays circulating in your plasma so that next time you come across that pathogen, you know exactly what antibody to make and to make it quickly. The graph of that is another really common thing that you see in AP Bio. And so over here, I would have the level or the amount of antibodies, amount to my Y shapes, and this is over time. So let's say here on day 1, I get exposed to it. I start making antibodies. It takes me a long time. It might take me 5 days to make the right antibody. And so all of this time, I'm sick. I'm actually trying to handle, and sickness is usually things like histamines, which I could have added back here on my second line. Histamines are what make the place super inhospitable, make some mucus. Mast cells are what make histamines. Make some mucus, make a whole bunch of inflammation happen. It's what makes you have that stuffy head and fever and runny nose and coughing and all that garbage. It's your body trying to get rid of the pathogen. So over here, I'm sick. My body's doing all that trying to deal with this. And finally, I make the right antibody and I make more of it. And so on this part, I'm on the downswing. I'm not really sick anymore, but what I do is I go ahead and I make memory cells. All right, and then a bunch of time goes by. And let's say I get exposed to it again. So here's day 27. And so I've already been sick, I'm better and all that. All of a sudden I'm exposed to it again. My body does this, shoots right up. It immediately makes the correct antibody and it makes lots of it. And so there's no sickness here. I'm not writing sick on this line because you usually do not even know that you were exposed to it again because your body fights it so quickly. So let's talk about the idea of a vaccine. When you get a vaccine, you are getting a dead or a weak pathogen. And that's so you don't get really sick from it. And so you make your body do the immune response. You go through all the steps. You just don't have to do it so intensely because the thing wasn't very strong in the first place. So you're going to learn how to make the right antibodies and you are going to make memory cells. And those memory cells are going to circulate through your body so that if you get exposed to it again, no matter how strong it is, you know how to make the right antibody and you don't get sick. So this is a great example of active immunity. And it's so important in a community because it is reducing the chance that any of these pathogens can spread. Things like polio have been wiped out because people are vaccinated, which means that they're not going to get it and they're not going to pass it. So it is going to die out. Over here, if I go back to my third line, that was just my humoral response. I also have what's called my cell-mediated response. The cell-mediated response gets T cells going. So we call these cytotoxic cells, and they are able to make cytotoxins. These are chemicals like perforin that'll actually take an infected body cell, spray chemicals on it, and that causes this to lyse, and then it's going to die. Basically, they're going to wear away the membrane of it until the cell dies. So these are, we like to call them killer T cells. T cells mature in your thymus, B cells mature in your bone. Both of them are very specific white blood cells. All right, so the last thing I would mention, since I mentioned active immunity, so one more thing is passive immunity. So if you have passive immunity, you're actually given the antibodies. And when you are given antibodies, that could be through breast milk. So it's number one reason to breastfeed babies is because they're going to get antibodies right through the breast milk. Or the placenta exchanges antibodies. So mom's antibodies will be given to the baby in utero. Or sometimes, especially in our older population, you can get an injection. They won't give it to just anybody, but if you have been exposed to something and your body's just pretty weak and you're unable to fight it, you can be given an injection of antibodies. So each of these are passive because you didn't go through the immune response yourself. All right, thanks for joining me for a review.